I need to go turn off my overhead light so it'll look a little bit better too. And then if you give me permission to share screen, then I'll do that. It's already after 10. I did not, I don't know, for some reason, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I always spend too much time to prepare remarks. Even if I'm doing a short moment of science, it's getting a little bit longer. And I wanted to address actually something Deanna brought up, because a moment of science may seem, esoteric to some people, but actually it's not. It's not intended to be. And anybody that thinks that stuff we present is esoteric, I think, it's a reflection on how badly I'm doing my job, because it's meant to be retailed for the ordinary person and have to kind of stretch a little bit intellectually. But I think that's a part of we should be ourselves out of our comfort zones a little bit to stretch and try to comprehend things that we haven't before. I mean, that's how we learn and grow, right? Oh, let me turn off this overhead light.
Yeah, sorry about that. For some reason, my Zoom is not working properly, but.
Well, we see you, Don, and you sound great. Yeah, so it's working right now.
All right. Well, should we wait another minute, see if she logs in, or where my partner Kit is at now? She doesn't
sure,
be
let's
with
wait
us
a
yet.
minute. I was going to say that an uncommon symptom that came out in the AARP magazine, or maybe it was online, is that some people's toes that have coronavirus, their only symptom is their toes turn purple and red and swell up. And it was so interesting because I was watching the Portugal-Croatia soccer match on TV yesterday. It was on ABC. And Cristiano Ronaldo, who is there, he's claimed to be the #1 player in soccer in the world. He was unable to play because he had an infection on his toes that turned his toes blue and red. And I just thought, I wonder if he has coronavirus. But
it is one of the, as I read, now doctor knows better than me, I'm sure. It is not an indication, but it happens after you contact it, after it's in you, and it's one of, it may turn, and not every time that your toes turn purple, it is corona. That's maybe not.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm going to say I haven't heard anything new about the coronavirus, but once other people start talking about it, then I realize, oh yeah, I have read other things about it, and I do every week. But this virus actually affects the vascular tree, by which is meant all of your blood vessels. It chews up the inside of your blood vessels. So all sorts of vascular things that mess up your kidneys, your brain, your heart. And how long all of this stuff lasts either. So yeah, it does quite a number on us.
Once it gets into your blood, it goes everywhere.
Well, of course it goes throughout your body, but and of course everywhere your blood goes, the blood vessels carry it. And since it affects the linings of your blood vessels, it's quite a nasty virus.
Linings
some people seem to do the lining, the inside lining of your blood vessels, what's called the endothelium.
Okay.
And that's a very important part of you. If you have sickle cell disease, for example, the blood cells get caught in the tiniest little capillaries, and you have a lot of those in your kidneys and skin and other places. So the very tiniest capillaries are the most susceptible, and of course that's where the gas exchanges happen with your tissues. So you have a virus that messes that up. At any rate, it looks like we should go ahead and get going. I have 10:07 on my computer. Is that the correct time?
Yes.
Yeah. But Tim, right. I want to make a suggestion. I would wait at least 10 or 15 minutes to start the presentation for everybody to log in.
Okay.
I don't like logging in and seeing that you already started. I log in at 5 after, and I missed part of the presentation.
it's always nice if I can have extra minutes to work on my presentation. I was saying earlier that I had a lot of fun putting this together. Really, I have to thank John Goche for the suggestion, because I just grew it from there. And in fact, when I'm through with presenting a little moment of science, that it's more than a moment, I would like you, John, to make any comment that you think is appropriate, because I thought about this too.
Comment about what?
You'll see. The moment is
Okay.
a slide. You sent me a link to a slide, and I'm going to be showing that slide and other things.
It's a surprise.
And as I said, when I finish, I would appreciate you jump in with anything. I will at that time say, John, do you have any comments? And you're the one I mean.
Yeah. Hey, John, I love your background.
I do too.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, that looks.
I found a good one that doesn't make my hair look weird.
Anyways, any suggestions for how to metastasize our weekly Zoom meetings? Definitely, if you are in touch with anybody who's moved away from the church or been connected with the church, Kit said she's going to go ahead and put our meeting number on. There's a neighborhood freethinker group that she's on. She's going to share it with them. So feel free to share that information and contact people that you think may enjoy what we do.
Hey, Tim, I wanted to ask you, have you ever had contact with Edwin? We haven't ever seen him on here.
I talked during this past week. He's doing fine. He's working on his house in Oklahoma. He's got a little cabin up there on a lake. It sounds like it's got more of a house than that, that's for sure. So yeah, he's doing fine. I asked him and told him we're doing these Zoom things and he should get on in, but this is the thing too, we're not technology inclined, are deterred.
Is he out preparing for the apocalypse?
Nah.
Yeah. The zombie apocalypse.
Well, John Hendricks has just come in, so that's good.
If he's preparing for the apocalypse, he better hurry up.
Yeah, but Tim, I would say I'd kind of be pretty rigid that you could start your presentation at about 10 or 10:10 or 10:15, so people have time to log on and chit chat a little bit.
Right. Well, I have 10:10 now, so maybe we should go ahead and get started. I mean, I know we like to talk afterwards. Y'all take a vote. Who wants me to start now?
Yeah, 10:10. It's good.
10:10. Yeah, it become a tradition, so people will know that it starts at 10:10. So they should log on a little earlier if they want to talk.
Yeah, but then they'll start logging on later. So just tell them it starts at 10.
Hey, there you go.
Oh, no, I mean the presentation.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So in the newsletter, I say we start right at 10. So if we lie, if that's a lie, then maybe, well, whatever. All right, so I'm going to share screen now. And we'll get here. And I can see you all over on the side, the part that's not covered. So at any rate, you all know the date, and welcome to the North Texas Church of Freethought, September 6th, 2020. If you don't already know it, I guess we have no newcomers here. If there were, or somebody's watching on YouTube, you're about to find out what an atheist church has to offer in the way of food for thought. A lot more than the traditional main churches, that is for sure. God believers had a monopoly on religion for too long, but no longer. So last week we considered the biblical Genesis story of Adam and Eve. This week we'll consider another origin story. And as we've not had a moment of science in quite some time, and we always enjoy, we will do it as a moment of science, and in fact, a little bit more than just a moment of doing so. Just review what Moment of Science is about. It's something of a play on words, I suppose, but on the other hand, if one to stop and give thought to something important on a regular basis, right, we should do that. Shouldn't it be good to give thought to the basis and foundation of our understanding of the objective reality that we share? It's so important. Science gave us tools that we needed to then look inward at ourselves and begin to grapple more effectively with this thing we call the human condition. And shouldn't that be a part of what a real church does? Shouldn't this be something that people do who really appreciate what it takes to make sense of the non-scientific, subjective qualia of what it means to be thinking being? So the moment of science is not about making science into religion. You couldn't do that, even if you wanted to. It certainly is not about claiming that fanciful nonsense is scientific fact, like the creationists do. Of course, scientific fact is always subject to change, because that's what scientific progress is. That's what all progress is, whether it has to do with a cooperative social enterprise of science or our own journey of self-discovery and personal growth. And that's what's so weird about the mainstream religions, is they want to be absolute and changing forever like they're God. No, that is not how life is or how it ought to be. So the moment of science is about looking at some area of interest in any of the sciences or theology, and then getting a grasp of how that understanding was reached, how ordinary experiences contribute to the relevant concept, and then also how the insights gained from a scientific understanding may flow back into and enlarge our perspective on day-to-day living. Most people probably don't appreciate it, but our modern society and civilization is the product of the back and forth dynamic between science and ordinary experience. And of course, what is ordinary? In fact, science is extraordinary, and what is ordinary, just our normal everyday lives, are quite extraordinary as well. And ordinary and extraordinary, that's an interesting juxtaposition. So this began when our distant ancestors began to see in the natural world the same thing when they hit things with rocks and poked them with sticks. Mechanism. One material thing affecting another material thing, and no outside supernatural force needed to understand what was happening. Then major milestones along the way were many, and in particular would draw attention to the role of measurement, of mathematics, that counting on our fingers and what came of that could be applied to what happens in the world. That mathematics was not something subject to human or any other, especially not supernatural whim. Things happen for reasons. Newton's laws of motion, of course, major milestone. It could account for falling objects on Earth and the planets in their orbits. We don't hardly ever think of that, but it created a sensation in its day, and it should really create a sensation in our own minds when we stop to think of it. Then the realization that life is chemistry, that the chemistry of life follows the same regularities within living things, including ourselves, as it does in tests, and that there's really no distinction between organic and inorganic chemistry in terms of the electronic rearrangements that happen. And finally, that we can only know what we experience. Our knowledge and understanding is we observe. It's not, if we don't observe it and experience it, if it's posited to be out there somewhere but we can't see it, it's not something we need to bother with. It can be things of our imagination, and that's certainly valued. But when we arrange and rearrange the different things that we experience, that's what we get truth and knowledge. And that's the only truth there is. So, our moment of science, the Genesis story, of course, of Adam, that attempts to answer in some way the historical question of where we came from, of how things can be as we see them now. But this question can be answered in many different ways. We saw last time Adam does answer the question, but not in a scientific way, of course. Then there are scientific ways of answering the question, the Big Bang, evolution, and so on. There is a way to answer the question in terms of where did the very basic constituents of which we are composed come from. This representation of the carbon atom, the element on which the chemistry of life, organic chemistry, is based. All the elements only differ by the number of positively charged protons in their nucleus, which in a neutrally charged atom is matched by the number of negatively charged electrons. The number of neutrons determines the isotope of an element. Notice that this carbon atom, the neutral 12 stable form of carbon, has 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons. Life, including ourselves, is based on this 666 element of carbon stamped within our being. Now, the word atom literally means that which cannot be cut up, the smallest unit of any element. Atom, just like atheist. means an absolute belief in deities, and the A in atom means uncuttable, where the tom comes from the Greek tomos or tem, to cut. So atom literally means uncut or uncuttable. We get our word anatomy also from this idea. Cut. And the word atom, by the way, was revived from the ancient Greek ideas about it in the year 1805 by the British chemist John Dalton. If you don't know that name, great, because now you know it. Of course, we know that atoms can be cut, but cutting any atom makes it no longer that atom or element. So, if we ask where the material substance of our bodies and the world came from, we're asking where the elements came from. About 100 plus elements. There are most of us familiar with their arrangement by the Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev in the periodic table. There was the 150th anniversary last year, and this came up at a previous church service. And he presented this periodic table, not this one you see, at a scientific meeting March 6th of 1869. Just think, we've only had this basic outline, and it's been filled in since Mendeleev, but since 1869. There were only 56 elements then known, so this first effort, like assembling half of the pieces of the puzzle that no one had any idea as to how it was supposed to look. That's what it looks like today. This is the image that John Goche sent me the link to. This version shows the cosmic origin of each element. It says Wikipedia, but it actually is from the NASA website. That's where I got it from. John, as I said, suggested it as a moment of science. I then tried to look for an appropriate video on the subject because that would be entertaining, but I could not find any appropriate video that talked about the things that I thought were important to talk about with respect to this. So I'm making that video right now. It's a good idea to just look at this for a while and ponder it the way I ponder any other beautiful experience, like the beauty of nature. In fact, it is nature, as much as a sunset or a landscape or an animal, but the periodic table is also a human construct, product of the human mind that could have been expressed in some other way, but at the same time, it is not wholly imaginative, not that there is or can be anything wholly imaginative. It reflects something important about objective reality and, of course, also how our own minds work. And in this case, it reflects where these different elements that make up most of the world came from. But what do we think of when we look at this? Well, to begin with, the familiar idea that we are stardust. More accurately, that any of the atoms of which we are comprised are the ashes of stars that then die, and their ashes dispersed into what eventually became our solar system and our planet. It should make us think of many other things as well. Now, such image, which is a sort of visual statement, as much as it is right, is also somewhat wrong. Many things are like this. The best correct statement always necessarily leaves something out. Detail left out of this, of course, but we could go on and on about what we think happened with the Bang. You see that the hydrogen and helium were left over from that. We could go on about what we think happened with the process of stars forming, and then the nucleosynthesis, the manufacture of the elements in the stars when the helium and hydrogens were burned, not really burned, a fire burns, but a different kind of burning into different elements. And of course, things that happened with supernovas, merging neutron star, black holes, and so on. One wrong thing about this is that many of the radioactive elements like technetium, look at that number 43, which is right beneath manganese, pretty much in the kind of the middle left the table. The technetium as on Earth today were not left over from the Big Bang or made in stars or anything like that. That's because they have short half-lives, so that any that were present when the Earth formed 4.54 billion years ago, that's currently the best estimate, 4.54 billion years, they've long since decayed away. Any thorium-2, for example, that was around on the Earth that long ago with a half-life of 75,380 years would be all gone by now. So although this says that that element comes from merging neutron stars, and that's true, what is present on Earth today did not come from. But now look at uranium-238, the most stable isotope of that element. its half-life is 4.5 billion years. Here's a table that shows the different half-lives. Look how short a lot of them are. I had to add plutonium at the bottom there because I couldn't find any table online, an easy table that had all the naturally occurring or most of the naturally occurring radioactive elements. But even plutonium only lasts for about 24,100 years. So any that was around when the Earth formed is long gone. But uranium-238, 4.5 billion years, there's still about half of the original uranium-238 around that was present at the time the Earth was formed. And most all these other naturally occurring radioactive elements, what they call NORM, today, they're breakdown products of uranium-238. And here are some decay chains showing how two different isotopes of uranium and thorium itself, a breakdown product of uranium, decay into other elements. So that's where we get a lot of these elements, not from the Big Bang and neutron stars and things like that. Very interesting to think about that elements are being created in the Earth's crust all the time and have been since the beginning of the Earth. Other radioactive elements like technetium, you see the half-life there, 6 hours. This material has certain medical uses. So you're not going to dig it up out of the ground and have it all be gone by the time you're ready to use it. You have to make it when it's needed. It is made by first making radioactive molybdenum by neutron capture. If you remember, the molybdenum is 1 atomic number less than technetium, and then it decays. Once it absorbs this extra neutron, it decays to radioactive technetium, and then you've got to use it pretty quickly. They actually have generators for doing this. So the philosophers, the transmutation of elements is a regular thing now. So here's that image again, and how is any of nuclear physics applicable to ordinary life? Is this just esoteric, scientific, making you doze off type of stuff? Well, it shouldn't be. But what can it mean when it comes to making sense of the human condition and religious questions and the like? Isn't it just a bunch of silly, geeky things, as I suggested? And I'm going to give you the answer, which is, no, it's not. For one thing, it teaches us, or reminds us, if you prefer that word, that creation can come about by destruction as well as by making things, constructing things. And this applies very much to our ordinary everyday lives. We've all been through situations where something in our life fell apart. And I think if we're honest, we agree that the products of that, the debris, turned out to be something that we could use. Another thing we can learn from this is that ashes can be fuel. Literally, the atoms of which we are made, all these atoms that you see here, at least the ones that are on Earth, when this expands and engulfs Earth, they will be, again, part of the whole nuclear fusion fission process. So any question that, not just where do we come from, has many levels of answers. Finally, and this is by no means exhaustive, and I invite you to think of other things you can glean and conclude from this type of scientific and different ways of representing it, is that it's a human construct, and that, like language, literature, and even morality, something we made. But does that mean that because it's not absolute, it's not given to us by God or the universe, that it's somehow worthless or imperfect? Well, maybe it's imperfect. I mean, you can make different versions useful for different purposes. But it puts me in mind of something very important that the 20th century philosopher Karl Popper pointed out. And we'll read this closely. He says, nearly all misunderstandings can be traced back to a fundamental misapprehension, namely the belief that convention, and that's certainly what the periodic table is, implies arbitrariness. But all of our senses are based on convention. They all work in certain ways. We've talked about this before. What we see of the world is constructed by our brains, and we don't see ultraviolet, infrared, or X-rays, and so forth. So it's all a kind of a convention based on how we're constructed, and so is all of our technology, the periodic table, and most importantly, the thing we call morality. It goes on to say, it must of course be admitted that the view that norms are conventional or artificial indicates that there will be a certain element of arbitrariness involved, i.e. that there may be different systems of norms between which there's not much to choose, a fact that was duly emphasized by Protagoras, so there's something else you can look up. But then he points out, artificiality by no means implies arbitrariness. Of course not, because it's related still to the objectivity in our experiences. So it's been our moment of science of where did we come from. I hope you all learned something and think about this in your everyday, that the elements of our lives are like the elements of nature and so many other things. Here are our principles for the Church of Freethought, that we enjoy reason and we love to learn more about it and live it. And reason is kind of hard to define, but it does mean making connections between things like we were just pointing out. It means enjoying that and enjoying life and each other. And it also means appreciating what we have, not to always be holding our happiness hostage to something that comes next or that we hope will come next. We should not be in too much of a hurry to get to what comes next. Appreciate the moment and the present. And finally, love is just another way of saying value, meaning, purpose, things that are important to us. The greatest scientists of our history and even today, they do what they love. They use this method of science and they produce all this scientific output, but still there's an element of what they're interested in, what turns them, what motivates them. Before we go back to that, I think, John, but did you have any additional comment about this moment of science? John Goche.
Yeah, I was, one of the things I didn't think about before when I looked at that representation of the periodic table was that they didn't include in that table, well, what about atomic decay from one element to another? I was wondering why they excluded it. For example, a lot of lead comes from the is the end product of radioactive decay from other elements. But they don't have they don't have any representation of that in the periodic table. Maybe it was too complicated, I don't know. So I guess the table that they show there is naturally occurring elements before they decay. I don't know, it makes it a little bit complicated, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, it's correct, but it's only partially correct. And here's these decay chains, and you see the lead PB for bum, which was the old name for lead, down the bottom there. That's what a lot of these things decay into. Of course, we hear also a lot about radon. You know, radon seeps up from the ground, it gets into your house, and radon detectors and so forth, and it's a cancer risk. Where does that come from? It has a 2.5 half-life to be something that was around when the Earth formed. I think radon is on this list here. Radon 22. It's less than 4 days life. So, you know.
Hey, back up one slide. Back up one slide, Tim. Something I noticed. No, the decay chains.
Oh.
That's curious. On the thorium series, polonium,
yes.
PO, decays into lead, but then lead decays. Well, I thought it was, oh, that's a different isotope of lead. Yeah. There's multiple isotopes.
That's a radioactive, yes, it's a radioactive isotope of lead, which then decays into bismuth and then into another isotope of polonium.
And then polonium decays into the stable isotope of lead. Okay,
right.
Now I understand.
You see on the other two series, the polonium is in about the same position, and it also decays into lead in those series. Both forms of polonium, 3 forms of polonium on uranium series.
Yeah, each with different atomic weights.
Isn't there more lead than any other element on the Earth?
No.
The most plentiful element on Earth is actually iron. And iron is a very interesting element and you see it's right there in the middle of the periodic table. It says floating massive stars and exploding white dwarfs. But the interesting thing about iron, that is the most stable element of all, from the standpoint of all the lighter elements can be fused into and make iron, and you get energy. But heavier than iron, it takes energy. So iron is actually the mid, and there are people that say that everything will eventually be iron because it's the most energetically stable element. Isn't that the way you understand it too, John?
I don't know, but yeah, I did know that iron is at the end of the chain of elements when it comes to fusion in stars, because stars of a certain size will as they grow, as they age, will accumulate heavier elements in the center, and then and as the pressure increases, those elements will fuse. Once they reach iron, then the star collapses, at least if it's of a certain size, because as you pointed out, it takes, instead of generating energy when lighter elements fuse into iron, it actually takes energy. So basically it's like you turned off the outward pressure almost like a switch. So that's why the star collapses. It doesn't have all this fission energy pushing out. It's now robbing energy to fuse the iron, and the star collapses.
This really
And
helps.
iron is what makes the dirt in Oklahoma red, right?
Yes, it what's make your blood red too.
Ah.
Isn't it all the interesting how all these things interconnect? And the other interesting thing too is that the astronomers make great use of the fact that if you can identify a star that has strong spectral lines of metals, and especially iron, you know it's either an older star, or if it's a younger star, which you can tell by other criteria as well, that a lot of older material was incorporated into it. So metal-rich stars are an interesting object of study for astronomers. Okay, so let's just move on to, we had showed our principles. Let's just mention again, if we talk about politics, we'll make sure that we're not talking about personalities, but sticking to actually what public policy is. It's funny how the word politics is used to refer to all these backstabbing, personality type things, but it actually comes from the idea of public policy. That's where political, it means related to policy. And that would be like, well, what should rates be? How big a military should we have? What is religious freedom, and what should we let people do because they say their God them to do it, and what should we not let them do because their God tells them to do it, and so on. It's all about respect for others. Remember our love principle. And maybe sometimes we often need to tell people, and I think I referred to this earlier too, that in the Senate, they'll often refer to each other, the honorable gentleman from wherever, because it's a way of reminding everybody, we're not questioning your loyalty, your decency as a human being, but we just disagree with you on our public policy. So always striving to be dispassionate and academic. We're talking about the public policy, not this or that politician who's a jerk and a creep and grabs people with the wrong body part. You know, that may factor into things, but ultimately we don't elect people who are saints. We elect people to put into practice the public policies that we think are most important. And then August 30th, some interesting things. First of all, look at the bottom there, the first birthday is John Dalton. Okay, remember John Dalton was the guy who reintroduced the use of the atom. The unit of atomic, is not the atomic weight, but there's a unit of weight, which is 1/12 of a neutral carbon atom. So those are called Daltons. If you look it up, it's actually a unit of weight. 1492, August 30th, this is the day that Christopher Columbus sailed from La Gomera and Mary Islands. That was his last stop before setting off over the open ocean to try to find India, which he thought he found, but of course he didn't. In 1522, another date in exploration history where the Victoria ship returns to Sanlúcar de Barrameda in Spain. That was the only surviving ship of Ferdinand Magellan's expedition around the world and the first known ship to circumnavigate the world. Of course, Magellan didn't make it back, but some people on that expedition did. This was the day on which they got back. And they were, one thing that really puzzled them too when they got back, it was a different day on their calendar. They compared how they had tracked the days and nights, and they didn't agree. Why do you think that was? Gee. 1620, this was the day the Pilgrims sailed from Plymouth, England on the Mayflower, and also the date in 1628 that the Puritans, their descendants, I guess, settled Salem, which one of the breakaway settlement was called Salem Village, and that's actually what turned into the Salem of the Salem witch trials. In 1803, British chemist John Dalton, there's again, that's when he began using symbols for it. So when you put down Tc for technetium and H for hydrogen, you're following a practice that this chemist John Dalton started up, which, as I said, it's down there as well, two lines down. This is his birthday. Finally, in 2018, much more recently, only 2 years ago, the Supreme Court of India decriminalized all consensual sex between adults. So basically legalization of homosexuality. 2 more birthdays, 1795, Frances Wright, a American author and activist, and Catherine Beecher, an early American educator and activist. And actually she was the one who pushed for and got kindergarten. We have kindergarten today because of Catherine Beecher, who was born on this day in 1800. So remember, Freethought is not free. Very much appreciate your continued financial support, and just being here is your support. Please visit the PayPal link at our website. Those of you who haven't, some of you who have, thank you so very much. We may continue our activities, and I'm still considering and will gladly accept suggestions as to how to market our church, how to get greater knowledge. And as we talked about before we started the service formally, was said that we should probably try to draw in some of our members who had to move away. Merlin knows about us, but he says, Merlin, you've told us there's not much in the way of freethinkers out there that you found, at least where you are.
No, not from my connection so far. This is the middle, the Bible Belt, as it were. And we got a lot more people going to church than don't believe in God. So I'm sorry.
Well, these
Go ahead.
These weekly meetings could be a respite for more people besides just you, Merlin, and that's what we like to do. Reasons, of course, that we can do together what none of us can do on our own. Get together, talk about these things, share ideas, and promote our values, which we talk about every week. It's not just about esoteric science stuff, our values and our commitment to being the future that we want to see, a world where reason is relied upon. People are aware of these things that make our lives better and don't waste their time with their hands together praying to a deity, trying to get something. So with that, we can move on to question and answer. Is somebody chatting there too? And by the way, thank you so much. There were no interruptions with coughing and sneezing. I was sneezing earlier, but as we do the presentation, it's good to meet. So there we have it. Question and